It was a Wednesday night, the kind of quiet, mundane evening that makes you forget the world even exists outside the hum of your own routine. ID just finished my shift at the factory, a long, miserable 12-hour day that left me craving something greasy and warm. So, I decided to stop by Charlie's Diner on the outskirts of town. The place had always been a bit run down. Neon sign flickering, old vinyl booths with tears, and the constant smell of burnt coffee. But for some reason, it was always open at any hour. The diner was pretty empty when I walked in, just me and one other person sitting at the counter. An older man, mid-60s, wearing a weathered denim jacket, eyes half closed like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't think much of it. Most people who came in late were half asleep or nursing a hangover, but I figured I'd just grab a quick bite and go home. Charlie, the guy who ran the place, was behind the counter as usual, looking tired but friendly. "Hey, Mitch," he greeted me. "The usual?" "Yeah," I said, slumping into the booth. "Just a burger and fries." "Oh, and coffee, black." Charlie nodded, flipping a greasy rag over his shoulder as he went to prepare my order. I dug out my phone to check the time. It was around 2:30 a.m. Normally, I'd be asleep by now, but something about the night made me restless. The older man at the counter turned his head slowly, locking eyes with me. His face was pale, like he'd been sick for a while, and his hands trembled slightly as he held his cup of coffee. He stared at me with this odd look. It wasn't the kind of look someone gives you when they're just tired. No, it was like he was waiting for something, like he was trying to see if I was going to do something. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't want to stare back, so I focused on my phone, trying to block out the unsettling silence. But then the man said something. "You ever get the feeling you're being watched?" he asked, his voice raspy and low. I chuckled nervously, thinking it was just an old guy being weird. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his coffee, slurping it down slowly like he was savoring it. His movements were slow, deliberate, unnatural. I don't know why, but I felt like there was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Charlie slid my plate of food over to me, breaking the silence. "Here you go, Mitch. Don't let it get cold." I nodded, grateful for the distraction, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. As I dug into my burger, I tried to push the unease from my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. It wasn't until I took a sip of my coffee that I noticed something odd. The older man had gotten up and was standing by the door, facing away from me, but there was a strange tension in the air now. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the whole diner had gone still, as if everyone had stopped moving. I quickly looked around, nothing unusual. The low hum of the fridge, the flickering lights, the steady tapping of Charlie's keys as he worked behind the counter. But there was something wrong. I glanced back at the door, but the man was gone. Just like that, he had vanished. Charlie noticed me looking and shrugged. "Don't mind old Rick," he said with a grin. "Comes and goes, says he saw something weird once. People around here think he's, not quite right." I tried to laugh it off, but deep down, I couldn't shake the thought that Rick had seen something he wasn't supposed to. I finished my food quickly, paid Charlie, and headed for the door. But as I grabbed the handle, I noticed something strange. It had been locked from the outside. I checked the door again, still locked. Suddenly, a cold chill ran through the air. I turned around, and the lights above flickered again. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A sound, a faint tapping, almost like fingernails, lightly tapping against the glass of the diner window. I turned slowly, my heart racing as I stared out into the pitch-black night. There, in the reflection of the window, I saw a figure standing behind me, the man in the denim jacket. But there was something wrong with him. His face, it looked like it had been peeled away, like someone had taken a knife and just carved it off. Before I could react, the figure in the reflection vanished. I turned around, nothing. But I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. Something in that diner, something wasn't right. I don't know what's worse, not knowing what's happening or the feeling of having no control over it. Right then, I was definitely feeling both. I stared at the door, my hand still on the cold metal handle. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if the diner had shifted around me. The whole place suddenly felt too quiet, like the hum of the fridge had turned into a low, vibrating buzz. Even the lights above seemed to flicker in rhythm with my heartbeat. I was still frozen, my mind trying to catch up with what I had just seen in the reflection. My stomach twisted into a knot. Was that some sort of trick of the light? Had I just imagined the man's face being wrong? But no, I could feel it. I could feel it in my bones. Something had changed, and it wasn't just my nerves. I pulled on the door handle again. Nothing. It was still locked. That shouldn't have been possible. I'd seen Charlie unlock it just a few minutes ago when I came in, and there hadn't been anyone else who could have locked it after that. So why was it locked now? I turned around to face the diner. There was no one behind the counter anymore. No Charlie, no Rick, just the empty booths and the dim glow from the neon sign outside, casting an eerie light across the room. I called out, "Charlie?" But my voice felt small in that giant, suffocating silence. No answer. I tried to push the door again, but nothing. Then I heard it, a soft scrape, like nails running across metal. I froze. It was coming from the back of the diner, near the kitchen. I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside the building or from outside, but I was sure it wasn't just the wind. It was too deliberate, too slow, the kind of scrape you make when you don't want to be heard. I took a step back, feeling my heart thud in my chest, and tried the door once more. Still nothing. And then, just as I was about to give up, I heard a voice, a soft, almost sing-songy whisper. It wasn't loud, but it was so clear, it cut through the silence like a blade. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, my pulse racing. No one was there. The diner was as empty as it had been a second ago. But that voice, it had been right behind me, right there. A chill ran down my spine, and I took a few quick steps back toward the counter, my eyes scanning the empty room, looking for anything, anyone. Then the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't just flicker. They buzzed and sputtered as if the entire electrical system was about to short-circuit. The room was cast in shadow, and for a split second, I thought I saw something moving in the corner of the room. Something crouched, hiding in the darkness. My gut told me not to look, not to acknowledge it, but I couldn't help it. I turned my head. The figure, low to the ground. Its outline was indistinct, shrouded in the dark. But I could make out enough. It wasn't human, not in the way I understood it. Its body was too hunched, too twisted. And its hands, I could see its hands, long and bony, fingers that seemed to scrape against the floor in a rhythmic motion. That's when I heard it again, the whisper. But this time it was louder, more urgent. "Leave, now." I didn't hesitate. I ran to the back of the diner, desperate to find a way out. I didn't care about anything else. I just needed to get out. But as I neared the kitchen, I stumbled to a stop. There, in the doorway of the kitchen, stood Charlie. Or at least I thought it was him. His face was pale, almost sickly, but it was his eyes that got to me. His pupils were wide, way too wide, and his gaze was empty, like he wasn't there at all. His lips twitched, a faint, unnatural grin pulling at the corners of his mouth. His movements were stiff and jerky, like someone controlling him with a puppet string. He didn't speak, didn't move. I wanted to run, to scream, but something kept me rooted to the spot. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor, my body refusing to listen to my panicked brain. And then, in that terrifying stillness, I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door unlocking. The low click echoed through the diner like a death sentence. But I couldn't leave. Couldn't. Instead, I stepped closer to Charlie because I had to know, had to understand. And as I got closer, I saw it. The faint outline of something standing behind him. Something I hadn't noticed before. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its shadow stretched across the floor. It stood completely still, a black mass that seemed to consume the light around it. Its face was covered in a featureless mask, and the air around it felt wrong. The air turned thick, like it was hard to breathe. "Charlie," I whispered, What's going on? What is that? Charlie didn't answer. Instead, his grin stretched wider, and his mouth opened, but instead of words, a low, guttural growl escaped. Before I could react, the shadow moved. It rushed past me, too fast for my brain to process, and I felt something icy cold brush against my skin. A chill so intense it felt like it was freezing my very soul. I whirled around, but the diner was empty. The figure, Charlie, Rick, everything gone, except for the locked door, which was now wide open. But the question was I safe to leave? Or was this all part of whatever had just begun? I should have left. I should have bolted through that door the second it swung open. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were filled with concrete, my breath shallow and ragged. The door was open now, yes, but I didn't know if that meant freedom or a trap. The silence in the diner was suffocating. It was too still, too quiet, and yet there was this low, humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere. I couldn't tell if it was the old neon sign outside or something else. Something closer, deeper. I slowly stepped toward the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The night outside was cold, and the wind cut through the open door like a knife. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stepped out, I'd be walking into something far worse than what I just left behind. That's when I heard it. A soft tap tap tap, just behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat. But the diner was still empty. The lights flickered again, casting a sickly glow on the walls. The kitchen was dark now, no sign of Charlie. No sign of anything. But the sound, it was coming from the back corner of the diner. The corner where the booth I'd been sitting in earlier was. I didn't want to go closer. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, to never look back. But something pulled me forward. Something compelled me to look. I walked toward the corner, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the booth, I saw something that nearly made me drop to my knees. There, sitting at the table, was Rick, the older man who had been in the diner when I first arrived. But it wasn't Rick. At least not anymore. His eyes were wide open, too wide, like they had been stretched beyond their limits. His face was pale, too pale, and his mouth was frozen in a permanent, twisted grin. His fingers were still, but I could see them tapping against the table, that same rhythmic tapping. It was as if he was waiting for someone. And then, it hit me. Rick was dead. I don't know how I knew it. I didn't see any blood. I didn't see anything that could explain it. But something about the way his body was frozen in place, the unnatural stillness of it, told me that he wasn't just sleeping. He wasn't alive. I felt the air around me grow colder, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, so loud it nearly drowned out everything else. And then, from the shadows, I saw it again. The tall figure, the one I'd seen earlier. It was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, watching me. Its featureless mask gleamed in the low light, and its presence shifted the very air around it, like it was somehow too tall for the space. Its shadow stretched long and dark across the diner floor, its body moving slowly, deliberately. I could feel it watching me, but I knew I couldn't look away. Then, a voice, soft but familiar, whispered in my ear, "You're not supposed to leave." I whipped around, but no one was there. The diner was still empty. It was just me and the dark figure in the corner, and the tapping. The tapping, it wasn't coming from Rick anymore. It was coming from everywhere. Tap, 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 tap. I could feel it in my chest. It wasn't just a sound. It was a rhythm, a beat. It was like it was syncing with my heartbeat, getting faster, louder, and more frantic. It was like the diner itself was alive, pulsing, breathing, calling me. I could hear something scraping against the floor again. Slowly, deliberately. The sound came closer. I backed away, but the figure was already standing behind me. I felt the coldness at my neck, and my skin prickled. My breath caught in my throat. That voice again, louder, stronger. "You're not supposed to leave, Mitch." I turned, but I didn't see the man from the window. Instead, the face of Charlie. Charlie was right there in front of me, inches from my own. But it wasn't Charlie. Not really. His skin was stretched tight, like it was too tight, like it was barely holding onto his skull. His eyes were bulging, the pupils black as night. His lips pulled back in a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have stayed," he rasped, his breath a foul stench in my face. Before I could move, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Cold, so cold it burned. The pain shot up my arm like electricity, but I couldn't scream. My throat was dry, constricted. The walls of the diner seemed to close in, narrowing around me as the air thickened. And then, it whispered, "You can't leave." The words weren't spoken, they were felt. A pressure, like a weight on my chest, pressing down, suffocating me. I struggled to break free, but the grip on my wrist was ironclad. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I stumbled backward, my legs weak, and I glanced up. The tall figure was right there, behind Charlie. It had moved so quietly, so fast, I didn't even see it approach. It reached down, its long fingers brushing against Charlie's shoulder, and the older man's face twisted in terror. Something was happening to Charlie, something I couldn't comprehend. His body jerked violently as if it was being controlled by some invisible force, like a puppet with its strings cut. But then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped. Charlie's body slumped forward, lifeless. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about anything anymore. I just wanted out. The door was wide open now, and I bolted through it. The night air hit my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. But as I stumbled into the street, I looked back, and that's when I saw it. The diner's neon sign flickered one last time. Then it went dark. And for the first time, I realized it had never been just a diner. I don't know how much time passed as I stood there in the street, my chest heaving with each labored breath. The night air had a bitter chill to it, like something had seeped into the world and frozen it all at once. I should have kept running. I should have gotten as far away from that cursed diner as I possibly could. But the fear, it kept me rooted to the spot. I glanced back over my shoulder. The diner was still there. It looked the same. No flickering lights, no creepy shadows. Just a dark, lifeless building sitting quietly on the edge of town. But I knew better. I knew what was inside. The tapping, the whispers, the things that had been waiting. I tried to take a step forward, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. It was like the diner was pulling me back, like it needed me. I shook my head violently. No, not again. I turned, my hands trembling, and started walking away. The streetlights flickered as I passed under them, and the further I got from the diner, the more I felt that crushing weight lifting off my chest. It was like I was finally breaking free of the nightmare that had trapped me. But then I heard it again. The tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It was distant, but I knew it. I knew what it was. It was following me. I broke into a sprint, my feet pounding the pavement as the sound of the tapping grew louder, quicker, until it was right behind me. The sound didn't fade. It was relentless. The rhythm, it was the same. It matched my pulse. I turned my head, stupid mistake. And there, in the darkness, standing at the end of the street, was the same tall figure. The one from the diner. It was standing still, just watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was aware of me. And I knew that if I stopped running, it would catch me. I didn't stop. I ran faster. My lungs burned. My heart was slamming against my ribs. But I couldn't stop. Not with that thing behind me. I had no idea what it was, or how it had gotten out of the diner. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let it catch me. I don't know how far I ran. Felt like I was in a never-ending chase. The street seemed to stretch on forever, the world around me warping and twisting with each desperate step. The tapping followed me the whole time, but no matter how fast I ran, the figure was always there, just out of reach. And then I reached the corner of the block, my legs buckling as I slowed down, trying to catch my breath. For one brief moment, I thought I was free. I leaned against the streetlight, gasping for air, my head spinning. But that's when I heard it. The whisper, "You can't outrun it." I froze. The voice came from behind me, the The voice wasn't just in my ears. It was in my head. The same voice that had whispered in the diner. Only now it was clearer, more personal. I turned, and there it was, the figure, right in front of me, standing at the edge of the street, its tall, elongated body blocking the path. But this time I saw its face. It wasn't a mask. It was something worse. It was like skin had been stretched too tight, and the eyes were nothing but deep, hollow sockets. A mouth, too wide for its face, hung open, dripping something dark and sticky. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. It stepped forward, its long arms swinging at its sides like they were too loose, too detached. And as it came closer, I realized that there was something inside of it, something controlling it. I could hear the whispers now, clearer than ever, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. "You should have never stayed," they said, the chorus of voices blending into one. "You should have never come." I tried to move, to speak, but I couldn't. My body was paralyzed, my mind screaming, but my mouth wouldn't open. The figure reached out, its fingers stretching toward me. I could see the long, bony tips of its fingers closing in, and I knew that if it touched me. Suddenly, a sound broke through the nightmare. Car engine. Faint at first, but growing louder. The figure stopped, its head jerking toward the sound. It froze for a second, and that's when I saw it. A set of headlights cutting through the night. Car was coming toward me. The figure didn't move. The car sped closer, and for a brief second, I thought I might be saved. But as the headlights hit the figure, I saw the truth. The car swerved violently, almost out of control. The driver slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car hit something that wasn't there. The vehicle flipped over, crashing into a streetlight. I gasped, the horror of what I was seeing finally snapping me out of my paralysis. I had to get away. I had to move. I turned and ran, but this time I didn't look back. I didn't care if the figure was still there. I didn't care about anything anymore. I just ran. I ran through the streets until I couldn't breathe, until my legs couldn't carry me any further. I didn't stop, not until I finally reached my apartment, collapsing inside, slamming the door behind me. I checked the locks 3 times. I checked every window twice, and I sat there in the dark, listening. I couldn't hear the tapping anymore, but that voice, that whisper, it was still with me. It said, "You can never leave." I don't know what happened to the diner. I don't know if it's still there or if I'm the only one who remembers it. But I know one thing for sure. I will never go back. I don't care if I'm starving. I don't care if the world ends. That place, it isn't just a diner, and I can't escape what it wants. I wish I could tell you that after I made it back to my apartment, everything went back to normal, that I found peace, but I can't. I wish I could say that I woke up the next day, shook it off, and realized I'd just been caught in some twisted dream. But I didn't. It's been months since that night. Months since I ran from the diner, and I still don't feel safe. I don't know if I ever will. The first few days after I got back were a blur. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the tapping. I could still hear the whispering in my head, like a million voices trying to claw their way in. I thought I was losing my mind. I tried to tell myself it was just trauma, that I'd seen something terrifying and my brain was just playing tricks on me. But then things started happening. First, it was small stuff. I'd be watching TV, and the lights would flicker. Just a brief moment. Flash. And I'd swear I saw something moving outside my window. But when I checked, nothing was there. I brushed it off, told myself I was just jumpy, that I was overreacting. Then, one night as I was lying in bed, I heard the tapping again. The same rhythmic tapping, like nails on wood. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, until it was impossible to ignore. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering in my chest. But when I opened the door, nothing was there. I thought I was going crazy. The next morning, I found something on the doorstep, a coffee cup. It was the same design as the ones at Charlie's Diner. A chipped, white ceramic cup, the logo on the side barely visible, faded and cracked. But it wasn't just the cup. It was the smell that hit me first. A burnt, bitter odor, like something had been left on a stove for too long. I froze, staring down at it. My stomach twisted. I knew that smell. I'd smelled it the night I left. The night I saw that figure. I slammed the door shut, but I didn't feel safe anymore. I couldn't explain it, but that cup felt like a warning. Like it was saying, "You're not safe here either." It was only a few days later when the nightmare started. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back there, in that diner, in that empty, suffocating place. But it was different. The air was thick, oppressive, and there was always someone watching me. Someone I couldn't see, but I knew was there. I could feel it just behind me. Sometimes, I would wake up, drenched in sweat, my chest tight like I couldn't breathe. The worst part? I couldn't tell if I was still asleep when I woke up. I would get out of bed, go to the bathroom, and the lights would flicker. A soft tapping at the door. A whisper in the dark. The sound of something watching me. It wasn't just in my dreams anymore. It was in my reality. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened. So, I got in my car and drove back to Charlie's diner. I almost turned around when I saw the sign in the distance. The flickering neon, the familiar outline of the building. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't prepared for what I found. The diner was gone. I pulled into the parking lot, my heart racing in my chest. The spot where the diner had stood was now an empty lot. No sign of the building, no sign of anything, just a patch of dirt, like the diner had never existed at all. I checked my watch. It was the same time, around 2:30 a.m., but there was no diner, no lights, nothing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty lot. My brain couldn't process it. I could feel my chest tightening again, the air thick with the same oppressive feeling I'd had in the diner, like something was waiting, watching. Then I heard the tapping, soft, faint, but unmistakable, came from behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. I felt my stomach drop. It was the same tapping, the rhythm I had heard in the diner, the sound that had followed me ever since. It was following me. I turned back to the empty lot, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The tapping grew louder, and then I heard it again, the whisper. "You didn't leave." "Not really." And then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, the same figure appeared. Tall, black, its face hidden behind the mask of shadows. But this time, it wasn't standing still. This time, it was moving toward me. Its fingers were long, twisted, and they scraped the ground as it moved closer. And that smell, that burnt, bitter coffee smell, it hit me again, stronger this time, choking the air. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The tapping was so loud now, it felt like the ground itself was shaking beneath me. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know why it had followed me, why it wanted me. I just knew I couldn't escape. The figure was right there. Its face was close, inches from mine. I could feel its breath, cold, like ice on my skin. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, like I'd forgotten how. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the figure stopped. I felt it, the pressure, the weight, the force pulling at me. "You'll wait," it whispered. "You'll wait forever." And I realized, with sickening clarity, that I hadn't escaped at all. I hadn't left the diner, because the diner had never left me. It's been almost a year since that night, since I stood in that empty lot, face to face with the thing I can never forget, and yet somehow am still here, still trapped in this nightmare, one I can't wake up from. The thing that followed me, the tapping, the whispering, it never stops. It's always with me, and I know now with an awful, crushing certainty that I'm never going to be free. After that night in the lot, I thought it was over. I told myself it had to be, that whatever I'd seen was just some twisted hallucination brought on by stress and fear. But I was wrong. Oh, I was so wrong. I thought I'd escaped the diner, that it was gone, that whatever dark force had held it together had finally let go. I was mistaken. It wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a place. It was something far worse. Something that feeds on fear, that wraps itself around your mind and twists everything until you don't know where the nightmare ends and reality begins. I thought I could start over. I moved to a new city far away from that lot. I found a new job, a new apartment, tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. But you know what? The diner followed me. It was always there, watching me. The tapping started again. At first, it was subtle. I'd hear it when I was home alone, when the lights were low and I was trying to sleep. Just a light tap tap tap, like someone tapping their fingers against the wall or the window. But I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Then it got worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, hearing that tapping like it was in the very walls of my apartment. I'd get up, turn on the lights, and there'd be nothing. Not a single sign of anything out of place. But I knew it was there. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? How could I explain that it wasn't just in my head? That something was haunting me. And then one night it happened again. I woke up in a cold sweat, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The tapping had returned. But this time it was louder. So much louder. It came from inside my bedroom, from the closet, from the corner. I forced myself to move, and with trembling hands, I reached for the door. I opened it, and there, in the corner, was a figure. The tall, black silhouette. Its shape so dark, it seemed to consume the light around it. I tried to scream. I tried to run, but the figure moved first. It stepped forward, its long fingers reaching out to me, but I couldn't move, couldn't run. It was like my body had been glued to the spot, my legs useless, my arms frozen. And then I heard it, the whisper, "You can never leave." This voice was distorted, twisted, like 1,000 voices all trying to speak at once. It surrounded me, smothered me, until it felt like the air itself was alive. The figure reached out, its fingers brushing my face, icy cold, sending a shock through my skin. It wasn't just a physical touch. It felt like it was inside me, burrowing into my very soul, like it was claiming me. The last thing I remember before I blacked out was the tapping. Closer now, near my ear. It was all around me, everywhere. I woke up, hours later, in a cold sweat again. My apartment was silent. The air, still. No tapping. No whispering. Nothing. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. Maybe I was finally free. But then I looked at the wall beside my bed. And that's when I saw it. A message, scrawled in something dark, almost wet, smeared across the wallpaper. "You'll wait." I didn't understand it at first. But now I do. The diner isn't just a place. It's a state of being. A loop that's been created. A trap that's been set for people like me. People who can't escape because they've been marked. Once you've been inside, once you've heard the tapping and felt the whispers, you're part of it. You're stuck in the loop. And I know now that I'll never escape. Because it's not just a nightmare. It's my reality. Every time I try to leave, every time I run, it follows me. The diner, the tapping, the figure. I'm still waiting. And it will never stop. That's it. That's the last part. I don't know what to say except that this story, it never really ends. It just keeps going over and over. And no matter how far you run, no matter how hard you try to forget, it always catches up with you. If you ever find yourself in a diner late at night and something feels off, don't stay. Turn around. Don't look back. Because if you do, you'll be trapped forever.